Hello there. In this tasting I'm going to be looking at a North Coast Chardonnay from California, and this particular wine is Buena Vista's Viticultural Society Eleonora's Selection Chardonnay 2021. So the Buena Vista Winery is the oldest winery in Northern California, founded in 1857 by Agoston Haraszthy. Now, Haraszthy was a Hungarian emigre who had come to California for the gold rush. He was clearly a colourful character. In the early 50s, he'd been the sheriff of San Diego for a couple of years, in fact, built the jail there. But then he headed north to wine country in search of what he described as purple gold, and found a site in what is now Los Carneros near Sonoma, and built his winery there. Now, the date of 1857 is given for the winery's foundation, but I'm not entirely sure whether much wine was produced, because it's not until 1861 that Haraszthy goes to Europe and sources vine cuttings. So he spent 7 months in that year travelling through Europe and brought back 100,000 vine cuttings. So the Viticultural Society that's mentioned in the name of this wine is a society founded by Haraszthy in 1863, and today it's a brand used by Buena Vista to highlight sort of small parcels from small vineyards or interesting clonal varieties and the sort of quite specialist small production wines. And Eleonora was Haraszthy's wife. Agoston Haraszthy was one of the first people to work to create quality wine in California. For instance, he propounded the idea of close planting for competition. He advocated the idea of reducing yields by dropping fruit if there was too much on a vine. He argued for lower levels of irrigation and, of course, worked to introduce Vitis vinifera. Now, unfortunately, Haraszthy's colourful career as a winemaker wasn't a particularly long one, because in 1869 he died in a rather horrible incident in a Nicaraguan river that was full of alligators. So in his absence, the property fell into disrepair and was abandoned. And it wasn't until 1943 that Frank and Antonia Bartholomew took over the property. And one of the things that they did that was very important was they took on a winemaking consultant. That winemaker was another key figure in California's wine industry, Andrei Teleschev. So a Russian-born, French-educated winemaker who at that stage was consulting to quite a wide variety of producers, people like Height Cellars, people like Jordan, various producers in Washington and Oregon. And he was really one of the advocates of growing Cabernet Sauvignon in Napa. So a hugely important character in the development of California's wine industry. Now, they had to put a lot of work into restoring the property because all the vineyards needed to be replanted and the winery had to be rebuilt. So having bought the property in 1943, it wasn't until 1949 that they produced their first vintage. Now, currently, and since 2011, the winery is owned by the Boisset family, and Boisset family vineyards is a group of wineries, quite high quality wineries, but a fairly large group of wineries based both in the US and in France. I think Buena Vista sits quite nicely within the family's portfolio of wines. Buena Vista's range is actually incredibly diverse, and although the winery is in Los Carneros, they produce wines from all over California and from quite a wide number of varieties. For instance, this wine, as I say, is described as a North Coast Chardonnay. It comes from 2 vineyards. So you've got the Stubbs Vineyard in Marin County, and then there's the Hawk Hill Vineyard in the southwest corner of the Russian River Valley. The Stubbs Vineyard produces fruit that's from a very cool, so it's very fresh, quite adds an elegance to the wine. The wine's 100% Chardonnay. It's hand-picked, the fruit's taken to the winery, and there it's pressed as whole bunches. So that will give quite clean juice. It doesn't need to be settled. It goes straight into barrel and starts fermenting in barrel. The barrels are all French oak. I would assume they're 225 litre barrels, but I don't have information confirming that. But it would make sense that if you're barrel fermenting, the smaller the barrel, the better the control you have over the temperature of that fermentation, because there's not so much of a heat load per unit. Now, 40% of the oak of that was new, and fermenting in the barrel as well as aging in barrel will help to integrate the oak flavours into the fruit. The wine then aged on its fine lees for 15 months prior to bottling, and it was bottled unfiltered. So the lees here should be helping to add a richness and a roundness and a smoothness, and should just help to provide harmony between the various elements on the palate. So let's see what we think, shall we? Looking at the colour to start with, you've got a medium yellow there. I almost wonder if there's slight touches of green, but actually I think that's a fairly sort of standard medium yellow colour there. The wine has 14.5% alcohol. I'm swirling it. It doesn't particularly form tears on the glass. It just appears to run off there. It doesn't seem to come across as, oh yes, we are getting some tears there, but it doesn't seem to come across as being a massively viscous wine. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? There's a very attractive, ripe, lifted aroma, predominantly of sort of ripe stone fruit, sort of ripe apricot, ripe nectarine, but also with a lovely fresh pineapple note in the foreground. There's a richness of vanilla that's very well woven into the fruit there, but it's definitely present. Other than that, the oak is fairly restrained. I think largely it's a question that it's quite well integrated. So let's have a taste. The palate is dry, but there's a richness, a ripeness, and a creaminess. So you're getting these ripe, juicy apricot, nectarine, stone fruit notes, followed up with an almost sort of sweet, but certainly very rich vanilla note, leading into creamy flavours that will have come from the fine lees, the yeast breaking down during aging. It's finishing it up quite nice and fresh. There's a lemony crispness to the finish that's lasting reasonably well. I think maybe I was expecting that a California Chardonnay might have been bigger and richer than this. At the same time, I think the North Coast designation sort of suggests to you that this is going to be a cooler region, cooler, fresher, not quite so full-bodied, and with that little bit more elegance. There's still a good depth of fruit. There's a little bit of alcoholic warmth. I mean, the wine's of mid-weight, so the fruit's not quite balancing the alcohol there. There's a little bit of warmth, and that's just sort of showing up a tiny cedary touch behind some vanilla notes, so denoting the oak on the finish there. The wine doesn't appear to be in any hurry to drink up. It's got a lovely freshness, it's got good acidity. I would have thought 3 or 4 years aging wouldn't be a problem for this. I probably wouldn't age it for much longer than that though, because it's got a richness and a roundness, and part of its attractiveness is its primary fruit, and that will have started to fade by then. I did have a look at the Wine Searcher aggregated score for this vintage of this wine, and that's coming in at 90 out of 100, which I think is a pretty good score actually. I might perhaps have gone a tiny touch higher than that if I was giving a score, simply because the wine has surprised me with the elegance that it has. It's not necessarily the most delicate or elegant example of a Chardonnay, but it's got some freshness and it's got some nice length that I wouldn't necessarily associate with a commercial quality Chardonnay from California. So thank you so much for joining us. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you found it interesting, please do press the like button. If you want to find out more, there will be a link in the notes below showing where you can find the wine, what its pricing is, some of the background notes we have to it, the critic scores, and various other bits of information like that. If you'd like to watch more of the videos, do please sign up to our YouTube channel and subscribe to that. It would be fantastic to have your support. If you have any comments you'd like to leave about the wine, the tastings, or anything else that we're doing, do please leave that in the comments box below. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, we'd be delighted if you passed that on to them, if you shared that with them. And so with that thought, thank you again for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to try and find some time to come and join us again in the very near future for another tasting. Thanks again. Bye for now.